now invite John Duignan to the floor.
It's quite an honour to be here. Please let me correct a misapprehension. In the blurb it said that I am a lecturer at UCC. I don't, I'm a mere undergraduate. So I can't take any there was some wit a few years ago on a forum who wrote up this little blurb. He said, I joined a religion started by a science fiction writer that used a double cross as its symbol, and then they tried to sell me a bridge. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, now I dedicate very, very little headspace to Scientology now, or Hubbard. I'm very much trying to put a lot of space between myself and my past within Scientology. Even though I love meeting ex-Scientologists, and that's wonderful. But I suppose I better try and present my case by presenting them with vignettes, if you like, okay? So really it's more of a personal description of what it was like for me within the Sea Org, right? Now, I went through a very, very tough period when I got out of Scientology, but the love, the help, and encouragement from family and friends, and the intercession and advocating and practical concern and caring assistance from various departments of state, HSE, social welfare, and DEC, and back to education, has inspired me. Now, these public servants put me on my feet, and they helped me to build a life from the wreckage that was left when really my life was when I got out of Scientology. Now, I want to attempt to provide the perspective of a person in the rank and file who lived his life according to the exacting codes of a Sea Org member for 22 years. Now, I lived in a place where grieving was downtoned and frowned upon, where critical analysis or questioning of the veracity of policy orders, or even the sharing of disagreements about management and managers, were all punishable offences. The minimum being that the perpetrator would be subjected to would be an extensive and invasive sec check. This is kind of a metered interrogation. It's the best way to describe it, but it is desperately invasive. Now, I recall having been under full-blown Scientology arrest. I was held in a cell, guarded night and day by baton-wielding security guards. And this was actually over Christmas and New Year holiday break. I remember being frog-marched by these guards, by two of them, to a little room where I was screamed at, verbally abused, interrogated, accused of all kinds of sedition, and then marched back to the cell in the tower. This was not the Stasi-run East Germany of the 1970s and 80s. This was lovely and respectable southern England in the 1990s. This was a place where married couples brought reports to the ethics department on any off-policy actions from their partner, be that sex acts may be considered perverted, or proposals to leave the Sea Org discussed in confidence with their spouses. Those reports were written up and handed into the ethics department behind the back of their partner. This was a place that collected files and files and files of the most personal details of every single Scientologist's life, and tabulated these files, cross-referenced them with names and addresses of family members, parents, school friends, and long-forgotten lovers. This was a place that when I woke up to the extent of the scam and the corruption, I fled, and I had to go into hiding in the maze of forgotten factories and transport cafes that make up the vast sprawl of post-industrial Birmingham, living with people on the run from the police and from gangs, and contacting my family in Ireland by subterfuge to arrange a passage out of poverty dystopia. But finding that my former Sea Org security colleagues had got there before me, and that my terrified foster mother asked me not to call the house because two of Sea Org members had been parked outside for a week and had knocked on the door, asked where I was, and followed her into town, and somehow knew my sister-in-law's address and had no problem accosting her and my toddler nephew with a similar complaint and request. This is a place where fear and intimidation rule, and yes, an ever-present threat of violence, where tools used to keep the happy Scientology front going and money flowing into Liechtenstein, Swiss, and Bermuda bank accounts, attested to by the suitcases of cash that a Sea Org friend of mine boasted of loading onto the Paris-bound Concorde as as he made his way to those "you got the money, we ask no questions" tax havens. This is a place where a new Sea Org recruit, who became my bro, a happy-go-lucky, impressive and talented young man, newlywed to a gorgeous girl when I saw him as at Los Angeles for another posting in England. Several years later, I met him in Vancouver, Canada, out of the Sea Org, darkly depressed, unemployed. His wife had been forced to have an abortion, attempted suicide, and then they had been ordered to divorce. I don't know what else had happened to him up there. I didn't have time to ask him, as I had to catch a plane, but that joyous spark that defined him was gone. This was a place where a person struggling with depression and mental illness, and indeed physical illness, was labeled a downstep, a degraded being, and shunned by the upstart Scientologists. This is where a friend of mine called Alice separated from her lover and consigned to what's called RPF, some kind of a prison camp is the best way to describe that. She swallowed half a bottle of paint thinner and jumped from a roof. We were ordered by the public relations people to say that she slipped on the steps. I don't know how they explained to the council why her lower intestine was in tatters, but she, now crippled at the age of 19, was shipped off to Italy to be cared for by her mother as soon as they could move her. I won't take it personally. This is where a policy called power, the responsibility of leaders, detailed how to behave and to act when close to a real power, him being L. Ron Hubbard, and flowing power to him, L. Ron Hubbard, the power source. I will to my dying day have sealed into my consciousness that statement, "See those pink legs over there? She didn't like me," the boss replies, "so why are you bothering me with it?" This is an actual Hubbard quote from a policy that all Scientologists reads. You can look it up online sometime. And the policy continues, where Hubbard has a South American dictator rounding up all the lepers in the city and loading them onto barges and telling them that they're off to a fine island designated just for them, and then blowing up the barges midstream. This policy letter is praising the action and advising Scientologist future world leaders to take note. And I do not need to word clear the policy. It says exactly what it says. Now, what of a child growing up in the corporate psychosis? A child in the Sea Org is consigned to what's called the Cadet Org, where they're trained to become Sea Org members. Now, I know of a group of children at the English HQ who did not see their parents for 6 to 8 months at a time, and then only for a week. Parents were too busy on projects over in Florida or in some other remote location. The OSA PR would come to me in a flap every now and again to organise a bus for the kids, and then dress them up in jolly t-shirts, holding little brooms and little bags, and run them down to London, where they would hand out the way to happiness booklets, and they would pose for photo opportunities in front of the Houses of Parliament. The photos were for the Freedom magazine that gets delivered to MPs, councillors, police, and charity missionaries. I looked after a friend's child for 12 months in that awful place in Los Angeles while he was on a mission in Austria. I would be at work or training from 9 o'clock in the morning, so I would drop the child off down at the cadet in the morning and pick up the sleeping bundle again at midnight when I got back. I took the kid to the beach for Christmas Day, that was our only day off, and I tried to organise phone call hookups with his dad every now and again. The kid was 6 years old, his mother had been SP declared about 2 years before, and had no access or contact whatsoever with that child. Now I must I'm going to close it fairly soon, but there's a couple of things I want to say. One is the story of a good friend of mine. She was a teenage girl who was going through some difficulties, rebellious things that teenage girls can go through. Now this was related to me by her herself, because I was talking to her recently. Now I knew her as a kid before she disappeared, as younger kids, her and her sister had been dragged into the Sea Org by the freshly recruited Sea Org parents with their fixed and dedicated glares, and dumped into the cadet org. This young girl went through all the emotional deprivation that Hubbard and his people seemed to think that a child should go through in order to become unthinking, unwilling tools. By the age of 13, this beautiful young girl was rebelling, as teenagers do, but she had a lot more reason to do so. Now, her sister had tried to escape, going to the local council to get help, asking for a care order and rehousing. The council people had Scientologists working in it, and they took her back to St. Hill, and they also handlers. She spent the next 3 years in an RPF camp in America. Now, the legal worked out that this younger sister was too much trouble. The 13-year-old girl was declared a suppressive person. Legal and PR and what's called senior HCO staff told the CO parents that they could leave with the child and care for her, or they could be more realistic. There's no such thing as a child in Hubbard's world, just an adult in a small body. Now that was what applied in this case. The parents chose to remain in the their CO posts, didn't even say goodbye to their daughter. At 8 p.m., OSA took her to the train station, no passport, no papers, gave her £40 and put her on the train to London and told her to never come back. Now, I don't need to get too much into how she slipped into nightclubs after the first night on the streets and the first rape, picking up people, men and women both, and getting them to take her home. Her sweet ethereal looks got her fronting for drug pushers and petty thieves, and she made a life of sorts in that world. She only recently went through a Buddhist drug rehab in Thailand. She's back in England now and doing much better. And I saw her mother again. Her mum is too frail to stay in the CO anymore, and she was dumped out into social services. This once little girl, now a young woman, confronted her mother with that heart-wrenching story. The mother nodded, acknowledged her daughter, and tried to get her to buy one of Hubbard's newly released books. Thank you very much.